I want to go to play from start. That was the end. Okay. Let me just switch this here. I think that will put me on there, and I can see some of you guys as well, which is always nice when you're a speaker, you know. So romantic love was always something that was very critical to me, and it's actually what really drove me into the arms of Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche and Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, is trying to come to grips with that. I don't know that I can get into that too much tonight, but it's certainly a prominent part of my memoir. So the funny thing about compassion, everybody thinks compassion is really great, you know. So why don't we have more of it? Why does it feel limited? We have, the feeling comes, but then we go, oh, you know, I can't do it for everybody. What, you know, if I'm nice to you, I gotta be nice to everybody. And so we never think about that. We just assume that's a quality of compassion. And it wasn't until I met these teachers in Nepal that I was able to view it a different way. The way that we define compassion in the West, up until now, it's changing towards the Tibetan definition, but the dictionary definition of compassion right now is like sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. So these three words, sympathy, pity, and concern, are very passive. They're sort of, they're observer words. Oh, bad, you know, and so that's why I think that we've had trouble struggling with cultivating compassion, because it's just a way, it's similar to empathy, and it's just a way to kind of just feel bad for people. But when I ran into the Tibetan Buddhist definition of compassion, it's basically the desire, and they often say the heartfelt desire. The Tibetan word is ningje, which means the king of the heart, or from the heart directly. And it goes beyond sympathy and pity. It's the desire to want to relieve suffering. Having observed the suffering, it's the desire to do something about it. It's bringing that desire with you wherever you go, so that you can act on it without having to bring it up every time. So cultivating this desire to help others is a necessary prerequisite for training in compassion. Went backwards. And so empathy is something that they're pushing in medical schools now and stuff, because there's often surprisingly little empathy among medical students and so on. And so that's defined as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. It's necessary in order to generate compassion, but it's not sufficient in itself. Empathy stops there in terms of just going, wow, I know what that person's feeling. And in fact, it can even be harmful, what Matthew Ricard called standalone empathy, without this desire to do something about it, because you just end up sharing those terrible feelings and holding them in. And we'll talk a little bit about what to do with that later. And so then I found that feeling that empathy could be a problem is also widely promoted. Being empathetic is good, but it can hurt your health. Too much of a good thing. Avoiding the dangers of unchecked empathy. Okay, we're still talking about what limits our compassion. We have it, but we feel like we pick and choose when to use it. But I think in the West, we've rarely asked, why is it limited? Is it possible that it's not limited? Is it possible that it's unlimited? That's a question that we can explore. And also, there's a lot of talk these days, because people who aren't trained in compassion, people who don't know how to do it in a more effective way, can be harmful for sure. Compassion fatigue is a real thing. But with so much talk about the dangers of too much compassion, we're hesitant to cultivate more. And that's the widespread belief that it can do you in. as an example, there's a website called compassionfatigue.org that I found. I don't know the people, but they say caring too much can hurt. When caregivers focus on others without practicing self-care, destructive behaviors can surface. Apathy, isolation, bottled up emotions, and substance abuse had a long list of symptoms associated with a secondary traumatic stress disorder, now labeled compassion fatigue. That was new to me, that it was considered a traumatic stress disorder, but maybe it is. That's the problem. But it starts off by saying caring too much can hurt. So you read that, you go, I don't want to do that. So that's why this work, this taking the insights of the Tibetan Buddhist ways to deal with compassion and applying it to our own work is such an amazing thing. So maybe there is something we can do about it. So we all have a natural compassion to some extent. It's extremely rare. There are psychotic people and so on that don't seem to have much compassion, but ordinary people, animals, all have kind of compassion. More and more we see YouTube videos of leopards adopting a baby monkey and stuff, and nursing it. I mean, it's amazing. It exists. It's there. And we can cultivate and expand our compassion through training. And as a result, we can aspire to a compassion that's more stable throughout the day, doesn't wear out as we get tired, and vast, which is a more inclusive, that we don't pick and choose between the people to whom we can apply. And amazingly, we can have compassion that's more effortless. So then those traumatic aspects of trying to muster compassion over and over again kind of goes away if we know how to train. Okay. So the thing is that compassion arises within our own minds. It's not anywhere else. So whatever limits compassion is also within our own mind. So the place we have to look in order to try to figure out what we could do about compassion is in our mind. And the thing I've become more and more aware of in recent years is that in the West, we treat the mind completely like a black box. We measure, black box in science is something that changes something, but you can't see inside and see how it works. You put data in one side, it comes out, the other side changed, but we don't know why. And that's how we treat our own mind until we encounter these kinds of teachings, because we get the input and then we get our own reaction and our output, but we never think what's going on in between. Is there a chance to change that? Is there a way to work on the machine itself? And then the other thing is that because our compassion feels limited, I think that a model for the way that we treat our own compassion is as a rechargeable flashlight. So if you had a rechargeable flashlight, you wouldn't walk around with it on because it has a battery, right? So you would turn it off and walk around, and you would only turn it on when you really needed it. And because you didn't want it to wear out, you might start selecting who you use it on, who you shine it on and who you don't, because you know it's going to wear out after a while. So we treat our compassion like that. And then, of course, at some point it runs down and has to be recharged. So the question, and then like a rechargeable battery, its ability to hold a charge, you can't recharge a rechargeable battery forever. And then when it loses its ability to hold a charge, we call it compassion fatigue. So I think it's a good model, but can we do anything about it? And we need to ask the question, what are we doing to recharge our battery right now? So when you read articles about burnout and about compassion fatigue, they mostly not addressing it directly in terms of how you could prevent it primarily in the first place by practicing compassion in a more effective way. But how do you counter it? By recovering from it in some way, not just go home and drink and sulk, but do you go get exercise, go for a run, go skiing? Do you make a good meal and share it with friends? Do you do yoga? Do you get reconstituted from going to church? People have different methods. It's just there are more methods to recover from rather than to directly address the problem. But I think that most people utilize their most effective method is to go on holiday, to get out of the situation that you're in. And it also requires it to be a good holiday. There are non-good holidays, Sometimes they don't go the way you want. But if you have a good holiday and you're truly relaxed and your thoughts are flying free and so on, then when you come back, you go someplace like this makes it easy to, try to relax your mind. And then we often call a holiday by that name, a chance to recharge our batteries. So if it's a good holiday, our mind does become relaxed. It's dropped all those thoughts of it's too hard at work and I can't do this and I'm worried about that and I don't know about that. You kind of can let go of that. And when we get back, we come to work on Monday morning and we feel really good and we're kind to everybody for about 2 hours. And then that holiday feeling slips away. And it's not, most of us are not in a position to utilize 2 weeks of holiday to achieve 2 hours of good work. That's not a good ratio. So the question then becomes, is there some way, and this comes directly from Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche, not from me, this is what he taught in Medicine and Compassion, but is there some way to attain that feeling that we had on the holiday without leaving? Is there some way to train our mind so it could be an everyday feeling and we don't have to go on holiday anymore? We don't see the Rinpoches going on holiday. I've never seen it, it really, really rare. Sometimes I go sightseeing a little bit if they're in a new town because people want to take them around and stuff like that. But they certainly you never get the impression that I can't go teach now because I need a break. People are always begging Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche to take a break, So that's the question. Can we learn to practice compassion in a way that would not be experienced as harmful and we wouldn't wear out? Okay, so the Tibetan Buddhist insight is that our mind is naturally compassionate. It wants to be compassionate. It has all the compassion in the world already inside, waiting to be unleashed. It's covered up by our own thoughts and emotions and judgment and decisions and so on that we make. And so it's covered rather than something that needs to be injected and built up. So we need to figure out how to remove our own obstacles to compassion rather than inserting or boosting it. And then when we train in that way, we reduce our own suffering at the same time that we become more open to helping others. And plus, helping others is something that intrinsically makes us feel good most of the time. So we're not just trying to figure out how we can sacrifice ourselves on an altar of compassion, but we're trying to figure out how we can make ourselves better people, more comfortable, more happy, and more stable for others that we can benefit them and get the joy from benefiting them. So I think some of you know me and some don't. So I'll just really briefly talk about, I never set out in my life to become a teacher of compassion or that I would be in this position at all. I was actually a very lost kind of doctor. I dropped out of medical school once and I went back and I didn't know what to do. And then I learned about some medical problems at high altitude and I go, oh, I'll do that because I wanted to be a mountaineering doctor. This is in front of Mount Everest. And I wanted to be an expedition doctor and go on this. So I had this idea and I volunteered to work at this aid post where the arrow is there, which is in the Periche Valley, just below Mount Everest, which is up the valley and to the right around the corner in front of that snowy peak you see there. And so I did that 3 times for 3 months at a time, lived with Sherpas, and learned a lot about working in a really remote setting with a lot of difficulty. And I described that in my memoir, give you a hint of what that was like. But then I still didn't know what to do with my life. And I found out, I went down to Kathmandu after the third season, and I found that there was a small clinic there. This is just to show you that it's someplace exotic. The snake charmers weren't always there. It wasn't great for patients to have to walk through that. So I took a job in Kathmandu thinking that maybe I would last a year or so, but it turned out that the clinic was pretty special. It was the first clinic in the world that saw travelers and expatriates, when they were sick in their destination. And so no one had had a chance to do any research on what was the cause of diarrhea and fever and rabies exposures and all altitude and all these things. So we published a whole bunch of papers, became the most famous travel clinic in the world, and produced 2 presidents of the International Society of Travel Medicine. My partner, Prativa Pandey, became president of the society 6 years before I did, but it's the only little clinic in the world that produced 2 presidents of the main international societies. I'm proud of what the clinic has done for the world. But in my second, and then Prativa took it after I left from that little house to a full-on hospital that is now available in ICU and emergency care, 24 hours a day, staffing, and it's really been a great boon for people in Nepal. And in my second year in Nepal, I was hearing about a monastery in which the monks were having trouble getting medical care, because in 1984, everyone had trouble getting medical care. Outside of our clinic, which had just started and was really tiny, there were some government hospitals. No one spoke English. There was one mission hospital, which was pretty good, but people didn't know about it, and it was not easy to get care there. And so spontaneously, out of the blue, I'd never been there. I didn't know the name Chokinima Rinpoche. I didn't know anything. I volunteered to offer a free clinic once a week out there. I thought I'd like to volunteer something while I was in Nepal. I was busy working now. And so we did that. We created this clinic, and Tashi was the translator for me. He's gone on to become Lama Tashi, and you might have seen him in videos with Mingyu Rinpoche when he went, connected with him on his walkabout. But he was a 22-year-old monk and the only one who was studying English at the time. So he could translate for me. But one day, one of the monks I was seeing just turned to me and he said, "You're so lucky." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because being a doctor is the best life you can live, because you get to make your living by easing suffering in others." Well, it doesn't sound like much, but I'm still talking about it 40 years later, because it really changed my life. I had really struggled about being a doctor. Was it good for me? I hadn't thought about it, whether it was really something that was so great to be able to earn a living by directly easing suffering. And I could understand that the monk who is training full-time to learn how to achieve enlightenment and eventually ease the suffering of all sentient beings could think that if you couldn't be a monk, then the next best thing would be earning your living in a way that eases suffering in others. And that stuck with me. That was that's why I'm still talking about it. And so then through that, I met Chokinima Rinpoche. This is up in his greeting room in the original monastery. For those of you who've been to Nepal, that got damaged by earthquakes, so now he's in a different place. But for those of you who have been to see Chokinima Rinpoche in recent years, what's missing in this photo? It's kind of a trick question, but there's no people. You never get to see Chokinima Rinpoche by himself. And I had that over and over and over again. I would come in and go, "Rinpoche, come in, doctor," and we could talk. And so we had this opportunity, which is so rare. Just very privileged, And so this picture, I looked at it the other day. I go, "Yeah, there's no one else here." And that was often the case in the early days before he became more and more popular. As you can imagine, the thousands, tens of thousands of students who look to him for guidance these days and look forward to his in-person retreats. And then I didn't meet his father in the first year or so that I knew Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche, but one day they called me to go see him because he lived up on the side of a mountain, Shiva Puri, at a place called Nagi Gompa on this above Kathmandu. And you had to drive about an hour or so to get there and walk a half an hour, and there was no electricity and no telephone or anything up there. And he was having a heart attack, pretty massive heart attack. And so I went up there. They came and got me at like 5:30 in the morning. And I was so impressed that he had no fear, even though he'd been up all night having chest pain and couldn't breathe and stuff. And then the question was what to do with him, because even getting him off the mountain would be so much work, carrying him on someone's back. And then the Jeep ride was a terrible road. And then when you get all the way back to Kathmandu, there was no intensive care or cardiac care anyway. There was no monitored beds. There was nothing that would be better than just being up there by himself. And so I made the really difficult decision to just leave him up there after he'd had a heart attack. And I had an EKG machine, so I saw it was a really massive heart attack. And luckily, he survived. It was not a given. But at the time, I didn't know really anything about him except that he was Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche's father, and that he was a Rinpoche, but I had no idea. And so then, as I began to go see him to care for him in the aftermath of his heart attack, I thought to ask him for some teachings here and then. And first thing that I asked him is, because when I would go there, he'd just be sitting alone in his room, not doing anything at all. He had a mala in his hand. And I asked him, I said, what do you do up here all day? You know? And he says, oh, I practice non-meditation. And I go, oh, I do that. I spend the whole day not meditating, you know, and it took me 10 years to understand what they mean by non-meditation, which means there's no longer meditation sessions and the time between session. So that was my introduction to him. And then he gave some teachings at the end of Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche's fall seminar back in the 80s. And I went to that. And it was a 2-day thing, and I wasn't staying up there. And the road was so terrifying. And even though I had this really good motorcycle, I had decided the first day not to come back the next day. I thought, well, it's enough. I kind of got the idea here. And then I walked out at the break, and Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche came just streaming across the field to me, which he never did. You know, he never came to me. And he said, I think you should go tomorrow. It'll be good. And how did he know that I had decided not to go? He didn't say, are you coming tomorrow? And so I go, okay, I'll come tomorrow. I'll risk my life. And so I came back. And it was at that time that I first experienced something that Tuku Urgyen had a very unique, incredible ability to transmit what's called the pointing out instruction, to help people who are ready to experience what it feels like to be aware without forming any concepts, emptiness and awareness mixed. It's a feeling that no one can describe, and they can't. You know, it's very subtle, but it was like being hit in the head with a stick. And I go, what is this? So then I thought I needed to learn more about how to do that, because it only lasts a few seconds. And so I had this opportunity when I was working in Kathmandu for the next 10 years. I worked 15 years, but Tuku Urgyen died. But I would go up to Nagi Gompa for 3-4 days at a time when I had time off and do retreat. And then every evening he would send for me, and I'd have an hour or more with a translator to ask any questions that I could think of. And the one thing I wanted to share with you is how valuable that was. I realize how difficult it is to achieve that this day, but what's still valuable, and I see this all the time with beginning students, is you need to ask. If you don't tell them what's going on while you're trying to meditate or doing your practice, they can't help you. And if you ask, they'll give you an answer that will really progress your practice. And sometimes I'd run out of questions, and I'd ask like something incredibly subtle, like some little feeling of tingling in my back or something. And he would take that and expound for an hour about what was going on and how to really meditate correctly and stuff. So, and, you know, he died in 1996. And his whole generation of what, again, Mathieu Ricard called antique masters, the ones who did all their training in Tibet before they came out, aren't around for us right now. They've reincarnated, and we'll get to get teachings from them. But it was very special. And the thing was, I had no idea it was so special at the time, because I had no idea this wasn't just the normal thing. If you stumble into some Tibetan teachers, they'd all be like this. And so, but the thing that I would like to say is that the people who train in this tradition, the monastery, they really need our support, because, you know, we're trying our best to set ourselves on a practice trajectory that will transcend all our next lifetimes and allow us to be a benefit to all sentient beings. And it's only due to their teachings and their kindness that we can even dream of doing that. But they're working at it 24 hours a day. They're training, teaching. Now there's the university, and Westerners for the first time are getting to experience some of this teaching. So it's a gradual process as you come to believe in these things. But if you take it to heart, practice for your own benefit, ask questions, go to teachings when you can. And Tuku Urgen's teachings have been translated into a number of books. And I think some of them have been reprinted recently. So very worthwhile seeing his very direct way of teaching. Just I could talk about him a lot, and I do write about. I don't mean to keep promoting my book. I do kind of, but talk about the experience, and a very special experience that I experienced over having my own heart attack years later. So, you know, when I go to the fall seminar now with Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche, I realize there's just 5 or 10 people there who got teachings from Tuku Urgen. You know, there were very few at the time. And, you know, my son got to meet him, and my daughter was born 2 weeks before Tuku Urgen died. So he got to hear about her birth, but she didn't get to meet him. So it was a very special time. And Pakchok Rinpoche is his grandson. He got a lot of teachings from him. He's carrying on this tradition. So that's very, very special. I first met Pakchok Rinpoche when he was 4 or 5 years old at some teachings by Tuku Urgen Rinpoche. I was staying at a tent up in at Nagi Gampa. And of course, he's grown into just incredible teacher, unique in the world. We're very fortunate. Any of you who have selected or felt some connection with Pakchok Rinpoche, you have chosen wisely. Okay, so when I met Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche, I wasn't thinking about compassion at all. And it's Valentine's Day, so I was thinking about romance. Not only was I thinking about it, but I started experiencing a very dramatic romance right after I met Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche. And that took my attention for quite a while. Didn't work out. And then I was willing to start taking his teachings more seriously, like to try to overcome the sense of suffering that I was experiencing by trying to fulfill my life through romantic love rather than through an inner stability. So as I learned to meditate, as I took up other practices that can enhance meditation and stability, I was surprised to find that my relationship with patience was changing. So I just want to let you know, I didn't take this up like you could do now purposely to make your compassion better, but I found it out anyway. I was better able to listen, and they were more comfortable saying what it was that really bothered them, which is difficult for patients. And if you're kind of off-putting or not paying attention, they won't come out with it. And then after they've shared all of that, I found my mind was a little more clear in terms of finding the right things to say more easily. And I was more generous with agreeing to see people and so on. So it was so amazing to me that I thought, maybe this is something. Maybe this is a thing. And but I think it needed to be taught from the source. So I kept asking Chokyinima Rinpoche if he would teach a course someday for Western doctors and nurses. And he always agreed. And it took us 10 years to organize. I had to move back to the States at Jackson Hole. But, and I didn't know, if it would work. And the reason I started with doctors is I had access to them. I knew how to reach them. They had a daily need to provide compassion. I mean, it wasn't something that was peripheral or not involved in their work. And so, however, compassion's for everybody, and everyone ends up caring for somebody. And so I've really expanded. We still call it medicine and compassion because that's our brand, but it's really for everybody. And so is the retreat in Kathmandu this year for the first time. So this was the original medicine and compassion course in a ski area, at the base of the ski area in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And there's Chokyinima Rinpoche. And these are non-Buddhist for the most part. I avoided promoting it to Buddhist channels because I thought any Buddhist person would want to see Chokyinima Rinpoche. The question is, would a medical person with no experience in Buddhism find value in these kinds of teachings? And, look at this guy. He's short. He's wearing a dress. He speaks in Tibetan, and you have to wait patiently while it's translated by Eric, who's standing right behind him. And they did. They got it. They were willing to listen. They were crying. He touched them so much by talking about this. And I recorded the whole thing. And we did one more 2 years later. And those teachings were transcribed into the book Medicine and Compassion. So if you feel like you missed it because you weren't there 23 years ago when we did this, it's all there. And I think people haven't discovered that book enough. It's a Chokyinima Rinpoche book. Those of you who have read all of his books, most of you have not read Medicine and Compassion. And it's a great book, and it's very profound. It's much more profound than just a book would be about talking about compassion. I think he taught it 20, 30 years in the future. I think people will really appreciate this book more and more. And because it is so profound, I ended up creating this study guide, which kind of takes you through the chapters and what's the key point and how they connect and so on. And I found people really get a benefit from that. So to make it available, it's a Kindle book on Amazon. You can get it instantly. And then you can buy Medicine and Compassion wherever you buy your books. It's from Wisdom. And so as I was putting together the book Medicine and Compassion, it occurred to me that I'd been in Nepal for 15 years and I hadn't really looked into, is there already some tradition of training in compassion in the West? Maybe I shouldn't just pretend that the Buddhists invented it and that's the only way to train in compassion. And so I did some research. I looked all around. So one of the places that I looked was in the Encyclopedia of Religion, a multi-volume set on the library shelves by Mircea Eliade. And I decided to go in the index and look under compassion. These are photos of what's in the index. And so you look under compassion in a book on world religion, and it says, see love. And for discussion of Buddhist concept of compassion, see karuna, which is Sanskrit for compassion. And so you go, in the whole book of religion, it says, see Buddhist concepts. I go, oh, that's a hand. So when you go to karuna, they talk about it as compassion and what that means. And under love, when you go to see love, they're also talking about bodhisattvas, enlightened compassion practitioners. So I thought, maybe there really isn't something else when we're dealing with compassion. And so everywhere I looked, I found no tradition of training in compassion. At most, it was encouraged, but not that much. This idea of keeping professional distance was still a very powerful thing in medical schools. Don't get too involved with your patients. You won't be able to think clearly. It'll be too difficult for you to wear you out. And patients can feel that distance, that detachment. And so we have to break through that and find a way to not be detached and also not be wrecked by it. So ordinarily, if we want to learn something important, if we want to learn piano, we get an expert pianist to teach us. So who are the experts in teaching compassion? It turned out in my experience, it was the Tibetan lamas. So that's why we've gone there to base these teachings on what they could teach us. They were the experts. So where does compassion come from within us? Is it just a thought that we formulate? Is it something like a feeling that we get in our chest? Does everyone have it? But most importantly, wherever it comes from, is there a way to enhance it? Are you just stuck with the compassion that you seem to have, or can it grow? Well, in order to understand compassion a little bit better, we got to look at suffering, because we said compassion is the desire to relieve suffering. And right before COVID hit, beginning of 2020, I was at a big invited-only conference in Atlanta about compassion, and all the big players were there. And they went 3 days. There were talks by all these people, and there wasn't a single talk about suffering. I pointed this out at the end. How can we really be saying we're taking compassion seriously if we don't try to understand suffering? And so suffering is all these things. Anything you can think of that's unpleasant is suffering. Physical pain, loss of function, losing someone close to you, not getting what you want, just feeling bad, anxious, depressed. Someone attacks your reputation, just feeling uneasy, having to face one's own death, very profound kind of sufferings in many people. Just constantly living in hope and fear, constantly waiting to see how we're going to feel next, getting an email and finding that you're upset about something. We don't have any stability. And so suffering is endless ways to suffer. It's the nature of human beings, all sentient beings, but we're human beings. We can relate to it better. We all live in hope and fear. We all have to face what we don't want to face. We all have to lose what we don't want to lose. And everyone's the same. There are no exceptions. Unless you're a master who's overcome all this stuff, which is possible. That's why we're talking about it. But if not, this is what it's like. And so if compassion is a desire to relieve suffering, and everyone cannot avoid suffering, then our compassion should be aimed at everyone. If we want to understand why we can have compassion for all sentient beings, and not just the ones we like, not just the ones we love, not just the ones who are nice to us, but everybody is faced in this same situation. And so we can start off with our compassion training by equalizing ourselves with others. We get to a bodhisattva stage, we can care for others more than ourselves, but that's a difficult way for anyone to start, except, interestingly, parents who do that instantly when a child is born. Most parents would throw themselves in front of a car to save their kids, and they didn't even know him before. They're just meeting him for the first time. So that's an interesting thing. But it's bodhisattvas would do that for any sentient being. Not necessarily throw in front of a car, but it could be. And so that's why we can try to cultivate a compassion that encompasses all sentient beings. And again, if we buy the Buddhist concept of our compassion, then we have that capacity already. It's a matter of allowing it to blossom. And so these are Buddhist teachings. So we should ask ourselves, where did they come from? Well, the Buddha's first teachings, the very first things that came out of his mouth after he attained enlightenment, he said, yeah, just what I was saying. Suffering is present in all sentient beings. I'm saying it because he said it. He's not saying because I said it. But it has a cause. And the cause is the way that we form thoughts and attachments and connections and the way our mind works. It's really all has to do with our mind. And then he said, I discovered that there's a state of mind that goes completely beyond suffering. You can transcend even the need to be reborn to go through suffering again. No one had ever pointed that out until he gave these teachings. There was no thought of that. And then he said, and there's a path, there's a method, there's ways you can pursue this, that you can do it. Anybody can do it. And so that's what he taught. Why did he teach that? Because of compassion for the fact that sentient beings are born, they go through all these experiences, they die, they get sick, they get hurt, they lose people. His compassion was so profound that he at 29, left his wife and newborn son, abandoned them in a sense. He later came back and gave them great teachings, but headed off in the world. And his only goal was to try to find a way to end suffering for all sentient beings. So that's our example of compassion. And there's many others among his followers, but he was the one who originated, and we still look to his teachings for the guidance. So all these different kinds of sufferings can kind of be put into categories, just the things that I talked about that are mentally or physically painful. But there's also no reason that you have to go through suffering one thing at a time. You can, suffer through an earthquake in Turkey and then discover you have cancer when you go to the hospital or something. It's just this, there's no limits to the suffering. And of course, our heart goes out to all those people right now. It's just hard to fathom, the homeless and the loss. And but a third kind of suffering is something that's kind of unique to the way that Buddhism thinks about it. It's the suffering that arises from knowing that everything is impermanent. It's put in a more technical way in Buddhist teaching. Everything's compounded and won't last and will change, but impermanent is easier right now. And so we know that, we always know that whatever it is we achieve, we're not going to get to keep. Whatever it is we're going through can change in a moment. And that is a baseline kind of suffering that we can't get around unless we actually train in some way. Most people will be experiencing that their whole lives. And then, even if things are going really well in our lives, we can't escape what the Buddhists call 4 major rivers of suffering: birth, old age, sickness, and death. It was unique to me when the Tibetan Buddhists talked about how it's painful to be born. We know the mother goes through a lot of pain, but they also feel that the baby experiences a whole bunch of pain being squeezed through the birth canal. And if we were conscious, it would be unpleasant. You can imagine having your skull remolded by the birth canal and not being able to breathe and, this and that. And so it starts even when we're born. And then if everything goes great, no sickness, perfect relationship, perfect job, everything like that, we still go to age and get the infirmities associated with age, which I'm starting to be more conscious of at my age. And then sickness can come at any time, even right after you're born or at any time, and really change the trajectory of your life and can lead to death. And we can't escape it. So again, contemplating that all sentient beings share this is what we have in common with every other sentient being that we'll meet, is this, it allows our compassion to grow and equalize. That even the people that we detest have to go through this and are suffering in this way, and we can include them in our compassion. Not easy. We don't start with them. So birth, painful, old age, sickness can occur at any time, and some are curable and some are not. This woman was at the border of India and Tibet at the moment that the Dalai Lama escaped in 1959 and took the pictures. She was a photographer that ended up in Life magazine about that, and then later became a nun. And here she has metastatic breast cancer, is going to die within a few months. But she had achieved a lot of calm and a lot of ability to deal with it. It was very inspiring to see a Westerner who could show the real benefit of their training. And of course, death is unavoidable. So if someone asks you, what's the cause of death? What do you say? Once you're born, there's only one way out. And even Chokyinima Rinpoche has said a few times, which I liked, he said, even if in the history of the whole world, there had been one person who didn't die, you could hope to be the second. But it hasn't happened yet. So don't think that it's going to happen. And so we have to prepare for that. But once we're born, I gave a talk in Ireland one time to some doctors, and I showed this slide, and this one woman was really upset at the end. And he goes, birth is the start of life. It's not the cause of death. I go, I didn't get to debate it whether it was on Zoom, but it doesn't make sense, really. This, if you're not born, you can't die. If you are born, you're going to die. Becoming comfortable with impermanence really gives you some stability. I would urge all of you, I'm sure many of you are already thinking about it, but accepting impermanence gives you a kind of stability and dignity that you can't get otherwise. And so if you can just go, yep, that happened, it's impermanence. I asked Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche how he felt right after Tukul Urgyen Rinpoche died. He said, he wasn't only my father, he was my root guru. And that in Tibet, they value their root gurus even closer than their own parents. So imagine having them combined into one person and losing that person. And he said, but it's impermanence. What can you do? So really think about impermanence a lot. And I think my brother's watching, but this incredible photo that he captured where this monkey appears to be looking at these line of cremations and thinking, boy, if even these humans have to die, what chance do I have? It's a real symbol of impermanence here. Now, here's Pakchak Rinpoche, somebody who's a major teacher, and this is from a series of videos that we created at our medicine and compassion retreats, which are all available online for free. And I'll give you the link at the end. But this short quote from one of the videos sets a standard for me that was really something, as he describes what he feels his job is as a Rinpoche.
I think the two important things we need to rely on. When you do the social working, difficulty chasing people, doing work. And similarly, like what I do, all the Lama's job, actually, Rinpoche's job, getting worse than before. Normal Rinpoche Lama's job is be a pillar or the rock or the mountain for the people who they go through pain. When they have insecurity, they want to go and become a security. They want to get blessings. They want to get advice. They want to get guidelines. They want to share this kind of things.
Become a pillar for the people who go through pain. And it so struck me because I did it every time something was stressful in my life. I would run to the Lamas, and then there's a whole line of people, if you've ever been there, all with their big stress and their pain to bring to the Lamas, and they always have something to offer. We could aspire to be like that, to be a pillar, unshakable for the people who go through pain. Pakchak Rinpoche's newest book, Awakening Dignity, really addresses that. And so I would recommend that as well. When we talked about, when the doctors who came to the medicine and compassion retreat asked him about what to do about compassion fatigue, he thought about it and he said, we don't have a word for that in the Tibetan language. The idea that our intrinsic Buddha nature compassion could fatigue doesn't exist. What makes it seem like it fatigues is our own mental constructs and tiredness, physical tiredness, but not the tiredness of our compassion. So we want to switch things around. Compassion's not the problem. Suffering is the problem. Compassion is the solution. So the more that we cultivate compassion, the greater we can address suffering and deal with it and accept it through impermanence and really improve our lives through compassion training. How do we convey compassion? We need to show up and show people that we're really paying attention to them and cultivate an attitude of genuinely wanting to help them. This is different than just walking in and going through some techniques of eye contact, asking them their name, touching their arm, taking a seat, People can see through that, especially when they're sick. They're really sensitive. So a genuine feeling that you want to help is such a relief to the people that you're trying to help. Now, here's one of the key things of the whole talk, and I know my talk's going a little bit longer. I have 15 minutes or so to go. In order to open yourself up to the patient's story and their pain and what they're going through, finding out they have cancer, losing somebody, being totally sick and in pain and have difficulty treating, all the things that we need to look at. So in order to be there and open to that, we need to have permission, and we need to train ourselves in the ability to let go of those emotions when we leave. Here's the thing. I bet you for the vast majority of people who consider themselves to be compassionate, they measure their compassion by how much they take it home, by how much they cling to the suffering of the people they're caring for when they're not with them. And laying in bed at night, they go, oh, that was so bad. Oh, I feel so sorry for that person. And then it starts to really wear you out, you know. And Chokinima Rinpoche said this in the book, you know, is it possible to let go? And he said, if holding on to the emotions of these patients would benefit them, then we should do it. But it doesn't help them when we're not with them. And it only hurts us. So why do we do that? This permission. For those of you in a caring profession, this can be really transformative to try to take this to heart. But most of us don't train in the ability to let go of thoughts and emotions that we need to let go of. So that's the next stage, okay? Whatever limits compassion is in our own mind. And the only way to get better at it is the same way you get better at anything. You have to train. You can't just go, oh, I'm going to be better at it. Okay, so here's something. The medical model of our human body is that the brain is an organ and that it creates consciousness. Therefore, in the medical model, consciousness should cease when the brain function ceases. Okay. So here's a question for you. I can't see all of you the way that I've got this, but I'll try to look at a few. How many of you personally believe that there will be some type of awareness that continues beyond the death of your body? I'm going to look through here. Just raise your hand. Yeah. Okay, some of you have your videos off at this point, but yep, there we go. Okay. I can't quite count them up, but this is quite a lot. And ordinarily, yeah, great. I lost me, though. Oh, there I am. I'm at the bottom. Okay. Ordinarily, it's about 80% of the audience, wherever I am. And then I asked a second question, like, how many of you don't know? And that's usually the remainder. Interestingly, that these days, and even completely doctored medical audiences and other audiences, that there's only usually like one person who will say, I think it's just over when it's over. Okay. All right. So those of you who raise your hand, and those of you who don't know, which I didn't ask because it's hard for me to see you, if awareness continues beyond death, then what we call our mind has to be separate from the brain. Those of you who raised your hand are agreeing to this, okay? Because our brain doesn't hop out of our body and continue on in some way. So our consciousness is a non-physical entity that already exists within our body. Non-physical because when it disappears, we don't miss it, and it travels on, we can't see it. And so the Buddhist concept of mind is that it's empty of physical qualities of color, weight, size, anything, but it is our consciousness. And so then we can ask, okay, so what is the qualities of our mind? And so it's empty, but it has the qualities of consciousness. But it is also said to have the intrinsic qualities. It's not just a blank thing waiting to be filled in. It comes with all the quality and wisdom of a Buddha. That's why our teachers say you have Buddha nature. And we go, I don't feel like that. I can't. We need to accept that. If we're going to train to bring those out, we need to first agree that they're there. It's a big step for some people. It doesn't come like really quickly, but it's something to really thought about. And it's our thoughts and emotions that cause it, that we can't see it. So training in compassion actually involves removing those obstacles to compassion, seeing ourselves as having actual Buddha nature, rather than trying to increase our compassion. So training in compassion is just training in how to maintain a relaxed, aware mind while being motivated by the desire to help others. Just achieving a relaxed, aware mind is not enough. We need to generate this motivation. Eventually, that motivation will become completely spontaneous and in what we call non-conceptual compassion. But at first, we have to generate it because we're not used to it. So think of it, it's not just a matter of trying harder. We need to investigate the relationship between a relaxed mind and having a naturally compassionate attitude. And that kind of compassion flow results in what we talked about, stable, vast, and effortless compassion. It's achievable. And it's what we see in our teachers. If I didn't see it there for many, many years and unshakably and always present, then we'd just be talking about a theory about compassion. But we see it in our teachers and the monks and others, and even some Westerners who train in this way. This is the result of training. We see the result. And when we are relaxed, we're naturally more compassionate. What prevents us from feeling relaxed then? Nothing, except our own disturbing thoughts and emotions. It's the only thing that stands between us and having a completely relaxed mind. And in Medicine and Compassion, Chokyamine Rinpoche asserted this incredible statement, just threw it in. With diseases, some can be cured and some not. However, feeling emotionally ill at ease, which is how we almost always feel, can always be cured if we know the right methods and apply them intelligently. What are the right methods? How do we apply them intelligently? So if thoughts are the problem, then learning to look at our thoughts is the start of the solution. How do we learn to look at our thoughts? What does that even mean? Those of you who have practiced meditation will have some experience with this. Those who've never done it may not know, what does it mean to look at your own thoughts? You experience thoughts, you think them, but we need to get a little more sophisticated and figure out who's the observer and how do we let go of thoughts. Now, these next two slides have a lot of words. I'm going to read them really carefully because it's extremely profound. From Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. When a rainbow appears vividly in the sky, you can see its beautiful colors, yet you can't wear it as clothing or put it on as an ornament. It's intangible, in other words. It arises through the conjunction of various factors. So it's there, you can see it, but there is nothing about it that can be grasped. Likewise, thoughts that arise in the mind have no tangible existence or intrinsic solidity. So these thoughts that we can never let go of, that take us over, that we're obsessed with, where are they? Where do they exist? Are they like a rainbow? There's no logical reason why thoughts, which have no substance, should have so much power over you, nor is there any reason why you should become their slave. Think about how both happy and sad this is. Happy that there's a solution, sad that we constantly suffer by not being able to see our thoughts as being something that we can learn to let go through training. Feeling emotionally ill at ease can always be cured if we know the right methods and apply them intelligently. That's the basic teaching of Buddhism. Relaxed means being less disturbed by our own thoughts. Pakchak Rinpoche's close teacher, Nosho Ken Rinpoche, just defined the practice of Buddhism as trying to dispel the suffering that we experience as a result of the uncontrolled, relentless activity of our minds. We rarely get a respite from that. It drives people to take their own lives, to shoot other people and stuff. This is the nature of minds who have the habit of experiencing it like this. We can learn to let go of that. So when our mind is relaxed, the positive qualities of compassion and wisdom are naturally revealed. So one way to look at that is that our basic nature is like the clear blue sky. It's always there, untouched, undisturbed, undisturbable by the clouds that appear in front of it because of various causes and conditions of moisture and wind and temperature. It forms a cloud. So under various conditions, thoughts form in our mind, and they can obscure the clear blue sky. And we can sometimes experience our mind like this, no sign of the clear blue stable existence behind it. We can't see it, but it's there. It's a lot of what Buddhist teachers do. They point out that the clear blue sky is there. And eventually we can start meditating and experience the occasional thought and let it kind of slide away, and even get glimpses of the clear blue sky beyond thought. Even though thoughts might appear, but they don't stain the sky anymore. This is an actual picture of a sky. And so that's what we can aspire to in our meditation, but we need to do it in the right way. We can't do it by straining so hard and trying to make ourselves do something. We need to cultivate that, get in touch with that clear blue sky. And as Pakchok Rinpoche says, the whole purpose of meditation, the whole purpose is to see the nature of mind, which is peaceful, compassionate, pure, and free of all concepts. Our basic nature is like that. That's the purpose of training. Always remind yourself that when your mind is filled with judgment, comparison, expectation, hope, and fear, those things cover its true nature. So when you sit down and meditate, that's what we're beginning to train in. That's what we're going for. That's how we get beyond suffering. That's how we become stable to benefit others with our own compassion. So training in compassion is just training how to cultivate this relaxed, aware mind while being motivated to help others. And when you train in the right way, compassion becomes more stable and takes less effort. And then you can walk away and not be so affected about it. Do you think that our teachers, after they sit all day and people come with every problem in the world, that they go, if I have to see one more fucking suffering person, I just can't take it anymore. I need a couple of days off. I'm going to go play golf. That's not how they think. And that's our inspiration. So don't forget to read Medicine and Compassion. If you haven't already, feel free to get the study guides, like $2.99. And of course, all of what I talked about today in like a 7-part and some videos and some meditation training and stuff are all in this course that the Samye team helped me create. And I think, those who aren't at the talk, you can recommend it for others. I think it's really good. This is Lama Oser, who just met this young monk down in Mugmini and is just being nice to him. And it's just such an example of compassion. And so here's the link on Vimeo. It's a Medicine and Compassion when you go to Vimeo, or if you can't remember that, you can go to medicineandcompassion.com, which is my website, and get the link from there. And the video that I showed you is called You Are the Love. And it's about 12 minutes long, and it goes into some really cool stuff, and it's funny. And I would just start there. Everyone should see this video, especially with any connection with Pakchok Rinpoche and you haven't seen it. And for those of you who are going to be listening to this talk in Spanish, because the Medicine and Compassion training just got completely translated into Spanish, the videos have already been translated into Spanish. So for those of you who speak Spanish, you'll be able to watch the videos directly. Okay, just a reminder, I'm done, just like I thought. The Medicine and Compassion retreat goes to Nepal. For those of you who've never been to Nepal, what a great opportunity to live in a hotel with Pakchok Rinpoche. I don't know if you'll stay in the hotel, but nearby, and be there every day, and see Nepal, and to go over in the evening and learn why people walk around this stupa and what it's like to be around people who just take it for granted that you're there for spiritual reasons, instead of being seen as kind of an oddball sometimes where you might live, So the Pakchok Rinpoche, this Medicine and Compassion mug, and you can register at my website, medicineandcompassion.com. You only have to put down $100 to hold your spot right now. We'll collect later, so you can change your mind. and Lama Oser and Jack Datar, who many of you know, because he's kind of coordinating worldwide Gandhi stuff, and he's the executive director of Gandhi California, and I'm the president of Gandhi California. Anyway, he started to come and teach as well, so he'll be there. And so finish with this. So when his friend brought me to meet Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche for the very first time I met him, he came out of the door to greet me and was holding this statue. And he said, "Here, doctor, I want you to have this statue for helping my monks." I said, "I haven't done anything yet." Because I just showed him, he said, "Take it, you know." And so in my book, this statue plays an outsized role in my understanding my connection with Chokyi Nyima Rinpoche and with Buddhism and so on. So then I used the statue as the basis for the painting that Eva Van Dam did for the cover of my book. So that's where that comes from. I just wanted to show you that. To my great, unbelievable surprise, the book was submitted for an award, and it won the award for the best memoir. You know, I had been working on this book for 17 years, and no one had seen it who didn't know me. And this panel of people thought it was the best memoir they'd read that year. So I'm really pleased by that. And the people who've read it have really had a nice experience. They've sent me, every day I get emails from people who've read this book. So I really want to share it with you. I make almost nothing, so I just want to share it with you. You know,